In tonight's Red and Blue Political Roundup, a new CBS News Battleground tracker poll shows a sharp divide in the country over immigration. 58% of Americans disapprove of the president's handling of the issue. 42% approve. The House of Representatives is set to vote on another immigration bill this week after one failed last week. So what do voters want to see Washington do about the border crisis? CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins me now in tonight's Red and Blue Politics Roundup. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you.
So what about that question? What is it that voters want to see Washington do, both parties here, on this issue of immigration?
Yeah, well, we knew heading into this week that people had not liked the family separation policy. That got 3/4 of people disapproving. But there are big divides over what should happen next, so that we see, in terms of priorities, Democrats saying make it a priority now to reunify the families, and Trump supporters, and in particular Republicans, saying don't make that as much of a priority. That's one of the things that came out of the poll. But when you then look ahead and say, like you said, what do they want to see done now? There's always been specific pieces of this that people find favorable. DACA, for example, gets support from both Democrats and Republicans. Broader immigration policy, though, depends a lot on what you see or who you see it is that might be coming across the border. And that's where we also see big divides.
So the president himself talks a lot about what Democrats want. In fact, let's listen to what the president said at a recent rally in Duluth, Minnesota earlier this month.
The Democrats want open borders. Let everybody come in. Let everybody pour in. We don't care. Let them come in from the Middle East. Let them come in from all over the place. We don't care.
So it's interesting to hear the president characterizing how Democrats view this issue. Do we know at all, Anthony, how effective the president has been in terms of framing this question of illegal immigration?
So that's the perfect question, because in the poll, we asked people, what do you think the Democrats want to do on immigration? And the responses were fairly mixed. There was no one specific policy that stood out for what they wanted to do. In fact, a quarter of Democrats even said they didn't know what their own party wanted to do. We gave them a list of options, not specifically open borders the way the president describes it, of course, but have a lot of immigration, allowing most of the folks who are here to already to stay, having some immigration, mostly merit-based. But the one that tended toward having a lot of immigration was the one that more people picked. So, politically, you might say, well, if the president is describing Democrats that way, he might have an in with being able to convince the public of that, because that seems to be, at least from the polling, the direction, at least, that people think the Democrats would want to go. And it doesn't seem from those spread out responses that there's a lot of clarity in the public about exactly what it is that the Democrats want.
Interesting. Well, we've always known that there is a big divide, not just between the parties, but even within the parties, about what to do regarding illegal immigration. But specifically, when it comes to the question of how undocumented immigrants should be treated, what did your polling find, and what are the broader implications of that?
Yeah. See, the broader values here really split between what you might describe as pragmatism and what you might describe as sort of symbolic or values. People who were very concerned about immigration, people who felt that many of the folks coming across the border could be criminals or could be gang members, or at least some of them, they tended to say that people who were trying to come in ought to be punished, and that the United States ought to project toughness on illegal activity, that should be the message that the U.S. sends. Whereas folks who saw the illegal or the immigrants coming across the border as largely fleeing violence, who believed that they were here looking for work even, they tended to say that the U.S. should project kindness, should treat people well, whether or not they ultimately got entry or got to stay in the country, because that was the American value that they wanted to project as an example of how America treated people. So big differences on how you saw the immigrants themselves, and then that connects to big differences on what you saw as far as the treatment of the people coming across.
So clearly this is an incredibly charged emotional issue. Do we know, has the president been hurt at all when it comes to this issue politically?
Well, politically, what we saw over the course of the week, like I said, people didn't approve of the separation policy, but the president's base and Republicans now tell us that they feel like the president has solved it or ended it. He signed the executive order, so you get strong approval from Republicans on his handling of the matter overall. They also specifically say that they feel he ended a policy that he inherited, as opposed to Democrats and more independents who feel like either he may have ended a policy that he himself started, right, or that he hasn't ended it. And that's where Democrats point out that he hasn't, in fact, ended that separation policy. And so that, again, connects to their concern about the need to reunify families going forward. So the president clearly, bolstered himself with his base over what he did last week, and they definitely agreed with him and his position on it, but not everybody else does.
Wow, really fascinating to hear those different perspectives. Anthony Salvanto, always great to have you. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.